The chapter of Ready Player One covered in this episode features a mention of sexual assault. In my blind commentary, I'm initially dumbfounded, and I go on to criticise its very throwaway inclusion and its juxtaposition between 80s video game references. Nonetheless, it is just a mention and has no further bearing on the plot. If this is a subject that hits too close to home for you, I advise you to listen with care. Hello, welcome back to Ready Player None, the only podcast that asks, what's the future of nostalgia? We're looking at what's called Level 1 of the book, Chapter 1 as well. Level 1 starts with this big title page saying Level 1, and then it's got a quote from this Anorak's Almanac saying, being human totally sucks most of the time. Video games are the only thing that make life bearable. Which... Fair enough. Chapter 1 then. I'm just flipping through to see where I can name this character. Yes, spoilers, his name's Wade. I don't know when he's actually named Wade in the book. 20 pages in from the looks of it. At the minute, he's just the narrator. All of this is in first person. So, the narrator is woken up by gunfire in the Stacks, where he lives, the Stacks. And then he says that he woke up and he spent the hours until dawn playing Galaga, Defender, Asteroids. But I was a gunter, so I didn't think of them as quaint low-res antiques. To me, they were hallowed artifacts, pillars of the pantheon. When I played the classics, I did so with a determined sort of reverence. Wade, the narrator, I'm going to call him Wade. That's alright, isn't it? He was in a big film. His name was on the poster. Let's call him Wade, okay? Wade lives in a trailer with his aunt and hangs out in the laundry room where the Wi-Fi is better and it's more private and it smelled like liquid detergent and fabric softener. The rest of the trailer reeked of cat piss and abject poverty. There's something about just hitting the nail on the head right there. Oh, in fact, 15 people live in this trailer. No wonder he needs privacy. So Wade's got a laptop. He says it's 10 years old and a bulky, heavy beast. Now, I know this book was written in like 2011. I've got a laptop here that's just barely anything to lift up. So if the laptops of, say, 2030 are heavier than the current laptops now, I don't know. Let's put a pin in that. Shall we keep a counter of things that he's mentioned? Because we've got Robotron 2084 mentioned here. He finds his escape in video games, and his laptop's filled up with old TV show episodes, song files, and stuff from the 20th century. Which, what happened to culture from after that? You're nearly 50 years into a new century, and you haven't got... There should be bunches of... Put a pin in this. Okay, so Wade has watched 180 episodes of Family Ties multiple times over, and he likes to imagine that those smiling, understanding people are his family. Aww. Wade doesn't remember his father, but he does know that he had several old flash drives of comic books containing complete runs of The Amazing Spider-Man, The X-Men, and Green Lantern. And of course, there he is, Wade Watts. He's finally named, so let's all pretend I haven't been saying Wade for the past 2 pages. He's named Wade Watts by his dad because it sounds like a superhero name, like Peter Parker or Clark Kent. Well, it sounds like a Marvel superhero name. I feel like Clark Kent's probably a bit disingenuous, as an example. Knowing that made me think he must have been a cool guy, despite how he died. Cool guys don't die. Okay? His mum's name's Loretta and had raised him alone. She had 2 full-time Oasis jobs, one as a telemarketer, the other as an escort in an online brothel. She used to make me wear earplugs at night so I wouldn't hear her in the next room talking dirty to tricks in other time zones. But the earplugs didn't work very well, so I would watch old movies instead with the volume turned way up. God, I hope this part isn't autobiographical. Wade comes to the Oasis as a small child, sort of as a babysitter because his mum's working so hard. I don't know. Maybe your experience differed from mine. For me, growing up as a human being on the planet Earth in the 21st century was a real kick in the teeth, existentially speaking. Well, that's still true today, as it was in the future 10 years ago. Okay, so Wade's going existential at this point, and I'm not entirely sure what this part is all about. He's talking about how adults are bullshitting him, okay? Yes, he's believing all of the things that adults are telling him. And then he says, after coming to the Oasis and having the public library of what he calls artists and scientists and philosophers and poets, many of them long dead, who weren't afraid to be honest, he finds out a situation, what most people refer to as the human condition. It was not good news. And then there's just this paragraph here that is just... So this is his idea of somebody who would be honest to him, but hasn't been. This is what he wants to have been told, okay? We're descended from a single-celled organism that lived millions of years ago. This happened by a process called evolution, and you'll learn more about it later. But trust me, that's really how we all got here. There's proof of it everywhere, buried in the rocks. That story you heard, about how we were all created by a super powerful dude named God who lives up in the sky? Total bullshit. The whole God thing is actually an ancient fairy tale that people have been telling one another for thousands of years. We made it all up, like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. That's just 17 pages in militantly atheist screed. It's Reddit in its execution, shall we say. Okay, it gives him a potted history of the Earth from Wade's twisted point of view, which, to be fair, is angry about there being a global energy crisis after so many years of human civilization. Basically, kid, what this all means is that life is a lot tougher than it used to be in the good old days, back before you were born. Things used to be awesome, but now they're kinda terrifying. Okay, so in a book that's a love letter to the 80s... it's a good job there weren't any major threats of global conflict in the 80s, right? There wasn't a big red bad guy who appeared in every film and children's cartoon. And then this imaginary voice that, again, Wade made up, goes on to tell him that all the humans are eventually going to die and there's no heaven. Lighten up a little, man. Okay, immediately after, Wade's narration voice says maybe honesty isn't the best policy after all. Which is the kind of verbal backspace that could have prevented this book from being 370 pages long. Like, do you want your character to be likeable? Or do you want him to be a miserable jerk? Oh, well, thank goodness he's got the Oasis to keep him sane. It's really laid on thick about how much he hates reality and other people and the world. His mum's probably my age, right? His mum had been born into a world of plenty, then had to watch it all slowly vanish, which that is the world right now. His mum died of a bad batch of something shot into her arm when Wade was 11 years old, and he had to move in with his mum's sister Alice because she wanted more food vouchers from the government. Pretty standard young adult fiction heroic orphans so far. Wade is spending his time fixing computers and so on, bartering for food vouchers, before getting a sense of purpose in this Easter egg hunt. Okay, so while Wade's in his laundry room haven, his Aunt Alice comes in and threatens to pawn his laptop. This is pretty much laying it on thick that she's a withered old hag who hates fun, needs his stuff to sell for money. It's bad guardian stuff. If only Wade was destined for something more, like in some kind of a hero's journey. Aunt Alice returned a few seconds later with her boyfriend, Rick. So he wipes the hard drive of the laptop because nobody else can have the 80s pop culture once Aunt Alice's boyfriend, Rick, comes in and takes it from him so that they can pawn it for food vouchers. Rick was perpetually shirtless because he liked to show off his impressive collection of prison tattoos. Everybody needs a collection of something, right? Okay, so Wade now knows to keep his 2 spare laptops out of sight of Aunt Alice should she ever come into his laundry room again. Okay, this is the part where we hear what the stack is. So the stack is, well, the stacks are a bunch of mobile homes, or I suppose, caravans, that type of thing, all stacked on top of each other, which is, on the front cover. All this stuff about scaffolding and ladders. It's an evocative visual. Why not just have that as your denotation of poverty rather than saying that your house smells of cat pee? So imagine 500 stacks of about 20 caravans all on top of each other. And that is where Wade lives. Powered by solar panels on the top. Water potentially supplied by the rain. No sunlight on the lower levels. The trailer parks are a result of an oil crash and the energy crisis, and the cities being flooded with refugees from surrounding suburban and rural areas, housing shortage, and all that. Lots of people from unsustainable areas into these refugee hovels. As if life wasn't bad enough. Some of the stacks threaten to topple over and cause a domino effect. That's just going to kill a whole bunch of people. Okay, so Wade sneaks out of his particular trailer using a well-practiced rope. So he's done this before. Okay, trigger warning for sexual assault. And I know it sounds really bad to have laughed, but it's just the tone disparity that I'm laughing at here. Wade describes that he can't go down a particular staircase of scaffolding because it would alert certain people to his position. The people are described as often dangerous and desperate people, the sort who would rob you, rape you, and then sell your organs on the black market. Horrible. All of that horrible. Next sentence. Descending the network of metal girders had always reminded me of old platform games like Donkey Kong or Burger Time. Literally, the sentence after an unnecessary mention of sexual assault in this... Is it a young adult book? Or is it just a man-child book? Okay, sentence later. You can't get through this without just... I'd seized upon this idea a few years earlier when I coded my first Atari 2600 game, a Gunter rite of passage like a Jedi building his first lightsaber. Stupid. It was a Pitfall ripoff called The Stacks, where you had to navigate through a vertical maze of trailers, collecting junk computers, snagging food voucher power-ups, and avoiding meth addicts and pedophiles on your way to school? Did anyone playing Pitfall on the Atari 2600 say, oh, one day I want this to be a metaphor to avoiding meth addicts and pedophiles in a post-apocalyptic dystopia? Okay, so Wade passes by a lady's trailer. The lady's called Mrs Gilmore and is described as Wade's friend. She's in her 70s, which means she must have been born in, mental maths grinding to a halt here, the 1970s. And she's very friendly with him. She calls him Spider-Man because he's climbing all around. She offers him breakfast, but Wade has to go to school. What kind of school do they have? Mrs. Gilmore is described as super religious. She spent most of her time in the Oasis, sitting in the congregation of one of those big online mega churches, singing hymns, listening to sermons, and taking virtual tours of the Holy Land. So she's Wade's living connection to the 80s. She shares with him all the 80s trivia, stuff you couldn't learn from books or movies. I never had the heart to tell her that I thought organized religion was a total crock. To quote the almanac, people who live in glass houses should shut the f*** up. All the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Okay, so Wade's on the ground floor now, creeping through junk, through old cars and trucks, shopping carts, engine blocks, and so on. So Wade parkours through junk piles, basically, to find this van that's buried by cars. He has to squeeze all through between them. And with a key that he keeps around his neck, much like Halliday, which I'm sure is a parallel the book itself is going to draw at some point, Wade gets into the back of this van. The seats have all been taken out. It's just a small room about 4 foot wide, 4 foot high, 9 foot long, which is his hideout. So Wade now has 2 hideouts, the laundry room and this van. The van is described as my bat cave, my fortress of solitude. And this is apparently where he attends school. Okay, so the interior of the van has been soundproofed. It's full of his old busted laptops and computer parts. There's old car batteries. There's an exercise bike rigged up to recharge the batteries, which, if this was going to be a working van, I was going to ask how the alternators would work if it's completely crushed into a pile of cars, old cars. It says here, Wade uses the exercise bike. Charging the batteries was usually the only physical exercise I got each day. I pedalled until the meter said the batteries had a full charge, then sat down in my chair and switched on the small electric heater I kept beside it, etc., etc., etc. That's the only physical exercise you get each day, despite the fact you just climbed down a stacked pile of caravans. Okay, he's got a cache of food. Star Trek lunchbox. Should I do a drinking game every time? No, I shouldn't. That sounds grossly unhealthy. So this is where he keeps his Oasis console, provided by the school apparently, and does all his gunting. Gunting. So what are the mechanics of this? So the Oasis is accessed using this console, which is about the size of a paperback book, flat black rectangle. He's also got haptic gloves and a visor, so not a million miles away from actual VR headsets these days. The visor is described though as being like swimmer's goggles, blocking out all external light, so it's a bit more streamlined than reality. So you can apparently only access the Oasis with retinal scans and a login passphrase spoken aloud and picked up by microphones. And we find out that Wade's Oasis name is Parzival, which I think is like a German variant on the word Percival. So his name's Percy. Oh, and then after it verifies his identity and logs him into Oasis, there's a short message, 3 words long. Halliday's put it in himself. He's programmed it in as a homage to the simulation's direct ancestors, the coin-operated video games of his youth. Can you guess what the 3 words are? Can ya? Funko Pop vinyls. And that's where we leave chapter 1. Our hero, who lives in poverty, descends down to the ground floor of a horrible hovel, infiltrates a bunch of scrapped cars to find his secret van hideout, and he logs on his computer. That's everything that happened. Okay, tune in next time where we'll take a look at chapter 2, because that's how subsequent chapters work. I've been Gherkin. You can find me on Twitter at The Last Gherkin on Tumblr, The Last Gherkin on YouTube, where you can watch this podcast with subtitles, and thelastgherkin.podbean.com to listen to it on the go. Until next time, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny aren't real. Bye! I've been Gherkin. You can find me on Twitter at The Last Gherkin. I'm probably going to do that again without bashing the book onto the side next to me and having the microphone pick it up.